Morning everybody, and can I extend a very warm welcome to everybody to the Strong Communities Select Committee today. We have an agenda to follow, and we have a 15-minute public open forum, and we're very pleased to say that we've got 4 various groups from the public with us today. So we'll be dealing with that in a moment. I think before we start, for the benefit of all of those people that are watching on live streaming, I think it would be good if we all introduced ourselves. And if I could remind everybody to put their mobile phones on silent, and also to remember to speak into the microphone. So my name's Jane Pratt, and I'm the councillor, elected member for Llanelli, Gilwan and Clydach, and chair of this committee.
Hazel Eilert, Scrutiny.
Paula Harris, Democracy.
Richard Jones, Performance Manager.
Roger Hoggins, Head of Operations.
Councillor Val Smith, Llanbadach Ward.
Councillor Roger Harris, Cresson Ward, Abergavenny, and member of this committee.
Councillor Linda Guppy, member of this committee, and councillor for Roggett Ward.
Councillor Tony Eason, you or me? Carry on.
Good morning. I'm a member of this committee, and I represent Tintern and St Arvan's Ward, and I'm the vice chairman. Go on.
Sheila Woodhouse, member for Growfield Ward in Abergavenny, and I'm here observing.
Richard Roden, member for Dixton with Osbaston, member of this committee.
Finally, myself, Councillor Tony Eason, Dewstow Ward, a member of the committee.
Thank you very much. And if I can take apologies for absence. I know, Paula, if you could confirm
Yes, thank
those.
you, Chair. We've received apologies this morning from County Councillor Lisa Dimmock.
Are there any declarations of interest? So we'll move on to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 24th of May. And if I can first of all take any points of accuracy from members. Councillor Guppy.
Just to say, I think I passed my apologies through you, but I think you may have forgotten because I couldn't make it and you wasn't quite sure if you're chair that day. So could you add my apologies for that meeting?
Thank you very much. Are there any other points that any members would like to raise concerning the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 24th of May? Councillor Smith?
One was a response to the Llanbadach. That's all right. There was a reference to traffic at Llanbadach, and I think that it was in the next set of minutes.
This is for accuracy, not matters arising.
Yeah, that was accuracy, whereas it made reference to the slow traffic. It should have been the fast traffic. But I'll find it and I'll bring it to you, Chairman, at the end of the meeting.
Thank you very much. So is everybody happy that I sign these minutes as Councillor? Yes. And seconded by Councillor Harris. So that's moved. So if we can now move on to the minutes of the special meeting held on the 14th of June. Are there any points of accuracy that any members would like to raise? Are you happy that any other points from any members? Are you happy that I sign these as a true record? Proposed by Councillor Harris and seconded by Councillor Guppy. So everybody in favour? Thank you very much. So we'll now move on to the public open forum. And we have 4 different members of the public. We have 15 minutes set aside, which is set in our constitution for hearing points that the public would like to raise, issues they'd like to raise, and these will then be considered for future scrutiny. So these issues won't be debated today, but they will be obviously carefully noted and considered by this committee. So if I would, first of all, if I could invite Mr. Philip Boyer to address the meeting.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to address the committee. I promised you I would be very short, and I will be. First of all, I'm here representing what we call the Save Our Seats campaign. This is a campaign to keep the tables and chairs in St John's Square in Abergavenny. A petition was started by Joe Webb. It's now reached some 2,500 signatures. Unfortunately, she works full-time, so she can't be here today. John Child, who runs the King's Arms, which is the most affected of the businesses, has a problem in his cellar this morning, so he's not here today. So you've got the old age pensioner representing that Save Our Seats group today. I've really just two things I want to say, because we know that the substantive issues will be discussed on the 30th of the month, so I don't want to go to any of the substantive issues. But it's just to say that there have been in Abergavenny in the last few weeks talk, rumours, gossip, call it whatever you like in a small town, that somehow some agreement has been reached about what to do with the square in relation to the seats. I just want to tell you that on behalf of all of those people who are concerned, there is no agreement. There's been no agreement, there is no agreement, and that's the position we're starting from. But the second thing I want to say is that the people who are there concerned, which are the ones I've mentioned, we are very open to discuss with the officers of the council. If they want to meet us to try and seek an agreement, then my message today, and the reason I'm here, is really to say that we are ready to do that whenever it is convenient for the officers, so that perhaps then the meeting on the 30th can be more productive. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Boyer. And you have mentioned the meeting. We've had, obviously, this is a very serious issue to us, both as a council, and we know it's a very important issue to residents and to businesses. And we want to do everything we can to make sure that this issue is properly debated and that everybody that wants to be present can be there. So, as you rightly mentioned, the meeting will be on the 30th, and we really look forward to seeing everybody then.
Can I just add, because members asked this in the pre-meeting, that we also have drop-in engagement sessions. One will take place tomorrow in the Shire Hall in Monmouth between 5 and 7, and the other one will take place on the 16th of July at 6 p.m. Abergavenny Town Hall. 16th of July for Abergavenny in the Town Hall at 6 p.m. and tomorrow, Shire Hall, Monmouth, 5 p.m. till 7 p.m. It's on our Facebook page, our Twitter page, and there'll be a press release sent out tonight, which also has that. But obviously, the one tomorrow is 5 o'clock, Monmouth, Shire Hall, and then on 16th of July, 6 p.m., Abergavenny Town Hall. Okay? Thank you.
Can I thank you, Mr. Boyer, for coming along and addressing the meeting today, and we've noted your valued comments, and we look forward to seeing you on the 30th.
Thank you very much.
If I could now invite Mr. Rogers to address the committee, please. Is leave your presentation for us, and obviously it will be given every consideration by us and by the officers, but we have to be fair to everybody that's come along today, and we have 4 different groups. So if you could just cut your presentation down to similar time that Mr. Boyer has just spoken for.
So is there a different forum that I could raise these issues with council?
This is the forum that at which we take points from the public that they wish to be discussed. Obviously, we have got a strict agenda to follow. In our constitution, it states quite clearly that there's 15 minutes public forum. You're very welcome to speak, but I have to give a proportionate amount of time for everybody. And if I
get the hook around my neck.
No, well, if I let you speak for 10 minutes, then I'd have to ask everybody else to speak for 30 seconds, which wouldn't be fair to them. So if you could just speak for the amount of time that Mr. Boyer has just been given. We've got 2 other people after you that like to speak. I'm sorry I've got to be strict on this, but it is set in the constitution of the council.
Ask you then, has present today seen the briefing note? All the councillors who...
You've come here to address the committee, and I'm giving you the opportunity to do that. So if you'd like to address the committee, please, Mr. Rogers.
Sorry, Mr. Rogers, you will need to speak into the microphone.
I'll sit down. This is a case study relating to transport movements through a very narrow lane in central Monmouthshire, close to Usk, and it's been causing problems which have been reported frequently to the council, as yet with no clear indication of what a sensible and practical solution to the problem would be. So it relates to an area known as Slanger View, more specifically Coed Cunner, and a farm that's having lots of heavy vehicles attending the farm to provide them with goods, equipment, services and so on. So the issues that we as a community group are concerned about is the frequent use of oversized lorries on this narrow lane, damage to an ancient agricultural hedgerow, damage to garden verges, garden hedgerows and properties, impacts on quality of life caused by these heavy lorries, potential use of uncertified fertiliser, possible illegal installation of field gate in an ancient hedgerow by the said farmer, failure of MCC to effectively apply the principle of the Section 6 duty, which I doubt is very well understood because it's relatively new legislation, and who at Monmouthshire County Council is responsible for providing information to highways on biodiversity assets likely to be impacted by future plans and day-to-day activities, and advice on hedgerow and verge management. So I think as I've got to skip through this, which is very sad because it is complicated, I need really to go to the nub of the argument. The Section 6 duty, which is legally binding on all public bodies in Wales, and I'm quoting from the guidance now, it means that all these public bodies have to seek to maintain and enhance biodiversity so far as is consistent with the proper exercise of their functions, and in so doing promote the resilience of ecosystems. So it's making things better. It's not a status quo. It's driving the process forward to recover the lost biodiversity that's happened over the last 50, 75 years. And then embed the consideration of biodiversity and ecosystems into their early thinking and business planning, including any policies, plans, programs and projects, as well as their day-to-day activities. Prepare and publish a plan setting out what they propose to do to maintain and enhance biodiversity and promote ecosystem resilience. And what I have now is a whole series of incidents and issues that exemplify how this has failed to happen. But in essence, I clearly don't have time to do this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers. It might be helpful if I let you know that we are actually debating the whole issue. We're discussing, we have a discussion paper coming to this committee in September on the whole issue of HGVs. And obviously, this is a very important issue, and I would really welcome that you come along to that meeting and that we can prepare that obviously you have ample opportunity to speak when we debate the issue of HGVs. And I think that would be the best way forward for us. But all members have received your paper, and I would like to thank you for taking your time and invite you back in September when this discussion paper on HGVs, which this is obviously very appropriate, and we can debate and discuss it at that point.
One final thing for the minutes, though, if that's okay, is that this is about the implementation of a piece of legislation. It's not simply about big lorries are bad news. Big lorries do a vital job within, the need to transport goods around the country. But there is new legislation that the council has yet failed to embrace, and it's this Section 6 duty of the Environment Act that Monmouthshire has yet to understand and implement. And it means that in day-to-day duties of the council, as well as in their forward planning, you now as a public body have to be mindful of biodiversity and find ways of actually recovering the loss to biodiversity over time. So there's an ancient hedgerow being torn to pieces where we live, and it's very valuable in its own right. It's valuable as part of a network, and this legislation is here to protect things just like this hedgerow, and it's not happening. And I think it's because the legal process has not yet been embedded in the council.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Rogers. And can I just ask members, are you all happy that this item comes to our meeting in September? Can you just show a show of hands? Yeah. Thank you very much indeed for addressing the meeting. We look forward to seeing you in September.
Could each of the members, if there are enough there, have that
Yeah.
log of the incident? So
Thank you.
Thank you for giving me an opportunity.
And if I could now ask Mr. Peter Sutherland if he'd like to address the committee, please.
Thank you, Chair. Representing Lambaddock Community Council this morning. Usk Island Car Park, I take the Chair's point about these items are not for discussion today, but we'd like to log in with litter bins. There are 5 on the whole of the Usk Island site. We would request some consideration be given to extra litter bins and therefore extra collections. Point 1. Point 2, Usk Island, the amount of antisocial behaviour in recent weeks, owing largely to the weather but also to the behaviour of youths, is becoming unacceptable. A neighbour remonstrating with youths at 3 a.m, and I repeat 3 a.m. in the morning, had his car keyed the following morning. We get very little response from the police, who want us to report every incident to them. We're reluctant to do it because of the kind of action that our neighbour has experienced. We would welcome a more positive response from the police on that issue. In the same area, the Burgerman van, Kev, is willing to look at quotes for CCTV for the whole of the car park. Again, we would welcome some support and consideration if we could help with that funding. I think that would be a great benefit to the area, and particularly homing in on antisocial behaviour. The parking, in addition to that, on a Sunday on double yellow lines, with the gasworks going on, they've actually been parking their cars inside the barriers. There is no consideration for anybody in a wheelchair or anybody with sight difficulties. That's all for Usk Island Car Park, and I'm sorry to take up your time. Just one more brief point about Lambaddock Island. Lambaddock Island, we've got some really good support from the County Council regarding possible grant funding for resurfacing Lambaddock Island. Again, if the committee is minded just to kind of support that initiative, we would welcome it. There's a good chance we'll get a fair degree of funding for the resurfacing it. A lot of comment locally about how bad it looks, etc., etc. That's all from me. Thank you very much indeed, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sutherland, for coming along today, and we've noted the valid points that you've made. Have you raised these issues with your area committee as well? Because obviously Mr. Hoggins does attend the area committee, and that is a good forum for discussing these particular issues that are not to be brought to for scrutiny to this committee, but are obviously very important issues to your community.
We can certainly take that point up. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Hoggins will, has made, I'm sure, made careful note of those points. If I can now ask Mr. Andrew Powell to address the committee, please. Would you like to come down?
Please. Yes, please.
Yes, you'd like to start. Normally see you when I'm having a meal in your very good pub.
Hello, my name is Andrew Powell. I represent the Business Club of Abergavenny, also myself at the Growfield. We've got a small petition which I'd like to hand to you, which we did yesterday. We got 30 businesses to sign it. There is a two-prong attack with these A-boards and benches. It's not just the King's Arms and St John's Square. We feel as though it affects many other areas within the town, and so we look forward to our chance on the 30th of July to speak and come. But we just thought today we'd come along and just sort of, I got 30 businesses here that have signed. There's a couple of examples on there of how county councillors have said that it was a cafe ambience in St John's Square, and so the benches are obviously part of that. I understand there's a problem with the road. How we get around that one, I don't know. But it does affect other areas. The 18 square metres, it isn't enough for quite a few other businesses, especially in Neville Street. There's at least 2 others that will be affected if it was implemented at just 18 square metres. We have a couple of issues as well with the A-boards around town. Some people are silly and they put them in the wrong place, but I just think a little bit of practicality from people would solve that problem. But, you know, it's we've not yet talked to yourself. I haven't. I know John in the King's Arms have, but hopefully we'll have a meeting with you shortly. And I know we've asked to speak to Stephen Lane. Yeah, so hopefully we can arrange a meeting with him shortly.
Well, thank you very much indeed for coming along and for bringing this petition, which obviously we take extremely seriously, this whole issue, which is why we've got this special meeting arranged. And we very much look forward to engaging with the community, and be assured that the very last thing we want to do is to stifle any opportunities for trade in any of the towns, because we recognise how difficult it is in trading in the high street at the moment. But thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
If I could give Mr Hoggins and then Councillor Eason.
Madam Chairman, just to re-emphasise for the businesses and local councillors within the towns of Abergavenny and Monmouth, we are running these events tomorrow evening in Monmouth and Abergavenny Monday evening for you to come along. We'll give you a brief description of what the policy is intended to do, how it's supposed to work, and then we can take your questions, and that will help to inform much better the meeting on the 30th. And that's the idea behind it.
So if I could take next, thank you, Roger, Councillor Eason, Councillor Harris, and then Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Just something brief. I know we don't want to debate this morning, but it is a matter of similar concern in Caldicot area, and Roger was at Caldicot Town Council on Monday night, where there was expressions of concern about this matter. But one thing that does disturb me is the fact that it has raised a level of some debate with emails, which are quite nasty. I think we've got to calm down and look at this in a round. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eason. That's a point well made. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. I'm talking with my planning committee hat on here. When we've got important things to decide on, we usually go and have a look. If it's at all possible, beforehand, maybe on the Friday, for those that can do it, to have site visits arranged so we can actually see the problem on the ground. I know what it's like in Abergavenny, but I don't know what it's like elsewhere. We will really come to an informed decision. It will help us to come to a proper informed decision on the Monday. If that's possible, I'd welcome it.
I think that's a very good suggestion, and I'm sure we could arrange a minibus so that we could, as members, have a tour and really have a good understanding about what the issues are. So we'll certainly put that forward. Councillor Webb.
That's an excellent idea, Chairman. I would second that. That's really a good idea. I just wanted to be reminded of the present street trading policy, please. Could we all have a copy of the present document? Thank you very much.
Yes, certainly. We'll make sure that's circulated to everybody. So can I just thank all the members of the public for coming along and speaking to us today, and obviously we look forward to seeing you shortly on the 30th. But thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. So members, we'll now move on to the next item today, which is agenda item 6, which is the annual performance reports 2017-2018, which I would like to invite Richard to present to us.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to take the opportunity in introducing the report just to remind you about the range of performance information available to you and how the information you've got in front of you fits into our performance framework. That's okay, Chair. I know some members who were at the Select Committee on Tuesday may have heard this before, so apologies for that, but you'll be well informed, shall we say, after this. So the report in front of you today brings together two important parts of our performance framework. It outlines the progress we made in 2017-18 against the wellbeing objectives set by the Council, and also brings before you some key performance indicators in an important performance indicator set we use as a Council, which is also benchmarked across Wales. So introducing, as I say, I want to talk you through the performance framework which I've attached on Appendix 1 so you can understand how the information in front of you is just one part of a range of our performance information available to you. So we start, if you look at the diagram on Appendix 1, you start with the vision, which is in the middle, building sustainable and resilient communities, I'm sure we're all familiar with. And as a council, we share that with the Public Service Board in Monmouthshire. So the members of that Public Service Board have adopted that, so we share that with partners in various public services. And as a Public Service Board, they've come together and created a wellbeing plan for the county. Within that, there's 4 objectives to improve wellbeing, and members of the Public Service Board Select Committee will be aware that the Public Service Board is currently developing a more detailed action plan about how it will deliver those objectives. In terms of our role as a council, obviously we participate and actually play a role in the Public Service Board, but individually we've also got a responsibility ourselves to set wellbeing objectives, and we set those through the corporate plan, which members I'm sure will be familiar with. And in that corporate plan, which lasts up to 2022, we've got 5 priority goals, which are also our wellbeing objectives, and within that then there's various programmes of activity, 22 in total, which we'll look to deliver over that time. And very much future performance reporting from a strategic level will be framed around those goals in that corporate plan and the progress made against the commitments in them. The corporate plan has superseded the objectives which you'll see in the report in Appendix 2 in front of you today. The objective within the report was set back in March 2017. It was set then because it was a requirement under the Future Generations Act for the council to set objectives. Now that was shortly before the last local government elections, so some members would have been on the council at that point it was set, some of you won't have been. And it used basically the range of information available at the time. So that was from the wellbeing assessment, looks at areas around wellbeing in Monmouthshire, as well as policy and legislation. So even though the plan has been superseded by the corporate plan, it's important, and we have a duty to report back on how the progress we've made in 2017-18 on those objectives. So Appendix 2 sets out the progress. It covers 4 key things: progress against the activity we set out to deliver, some performance information to give you an understanding about how we performed. It links then to the Future Generations Act and how we were delivering goals at a Wales level. And then importantly then it takes through to the corporate plan, where that highlights how the work from these objectives will be continued in various forms in the corporate plan for delivery over the next few years. It's important that that's considered amongst the range of information you receive as a committee. Key part of your work is performance scrutiny, and you will see various reports throughout the year related to the activity within these objectives. And considering the objectives are focused on some of the more significant areas of work the council is looking to undertake, it's no surprise that actually your work programme is structured around a lot of those. Nonetheless, there may be areas in the report you think actually you could consider further for including on your work programme. Coming back to the diagram, on service business plans is another key element of our framework, and that's where really the activity which from these strategic plans is translated into more detailed action for services in their business plans. So each service in the council, and it's 49 in total, have service business plans over the next 3 years. And in those plans is where they evaluate their activity, plan their actions they're going to take, report against those actions, use performance indicators to measure their progress, and also manage and try and mitigate their strategic risks facing the service. So those are updated quarterly. They're available on the hub for members to use, and that really provides you with an extra level of information about how this is being delivered on an ongoing basis, in addition to the more periodic reports we bring to the committee. Final part, which we'll go through, obviously employee aims and objectives, incredibly important, then translating that into individual employee appraisals so they understand their role in delivering the council's objectives, along with a range of other responsibilities they all have. The final part then is performance measures. Performance measurement is embedded throughout our framework, and there's a range of locally set and nationally set measures that services use to evaluate the performance. The one in front of you today in Appendix 3 is a set by Data Cymru, and those are used really to benchmark council performance against a range of key services. So we don't yet have benchmarking information for those for this year, 2017-18, but that will be available over the next few weeks. But we wanted to bring you those indicators. It's important to bring them together as a set so you can see how we performed against the targets we've set in those. The So I think that sort of concludes my introduction to the report. Hopefully that gives you a feel for what the reason why it's been brought to you and how that relates to every other information available to you as part of the framework. I'm happy to take any questions. I should also add that we will be doing a full annual report that will come through to Council in September. So the objective in front of you will form a big part of that, and it will be sat alongside a range of other information we'll be taking to the other 3 select committees, as well as a broader assessment of performance in areas such as finance and other things like that. So it will be a much broader report, and that will be available to Council in September. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay.
Obviously, if I can't answer them, we'll...
Well, thank you very much, Richard, for that report. And it's good now that we're seeing more meat on the bones. And I know that one of the things that we discussed early on when we were looking at this was well-being, was that we wanted to know how we were actually going to evaluate this. So, members, if I can just draw your attention to the recommendations, members are invited to scrutinise how well the authority performed against the objectives it set for the previous financial year, and to scrutinise performance measured using a range of nationally set indicators that fall within the remit of the committee, and the indicators are clearly shown in the appendices there. So are there any questions for Richard this morning from any members, please? Councillor Eason.
Thank you, Chair, and for putting meat on the bone. It's to do with the food establishments. What do you mean by there has been an increase in the percentage of food establishments which are broadly compliant? What do you mean by broadly compliant when you consider the 31 not compliant in your eyes? So what is the criteria? What does broadly compliant mean?
The microphone on. So there's a guidance note that guides what defines as broadly compliant, and for each food hygiene inspection completed. I'm just looking now to get the guidance in front of me because it's not technically to hold in my mind. Broadly compliant is one which meets food hygiene standards, and I'll get the information in front of me now. It must score more than 10 points for each of the following 3 factors: level of compliance with statutory obligations on hygiene requirements, confidence in management control systems, and if I find the final one. Sorry, it's not an area of particular technical expertise, but I think what the indicator tries to do is bring together and say how many premises in the year have been assessed and how many of those have been broadly compliant. So those not showing as being compliant with process are ones which have met the broadly compliant standard which is set out when inspections are undertaken.
I find an unusual phrase to use, broadly compliant. You're either compliant or you're not compliant. But in terms of the 1050 which you registered, there are 31 not compliant. What happens to those food establishments that are not compliant or not broadly compliant, whichever you look at it?
Probably it's straying outside my area of sort of technical expertise in understanding the follow-up. I think probably I can send you the technical guidance note I've got in terms of the definition, which I probably poorly explained just a minute ago, and it may be something I need to get back to you on.
And just really to say, Councillor Eason, that obviously Richard has come here to communicate this information to us. If we've got sort of specific technical questions, then I think we need to direct those to David Jones, who is the head of that service. So would you be able to
Could we send that from this committee to David Jones?
Yes, we will. Yes, but thank you for raising that important point. Has any Councillor Smith and then Councillor Harris?
Looking on Appendix 3, the first item, 001, the number of working days lost in sickness. I've always thought it would be useful to see them broken down. For us, I know they are broken down elsewhere, long term and short term, because there's that makes quite a difference in in my interpretation of the figures. Says we've seen a long term. So a breakdown in those I think will be useful for short term and long term. And I note there that there's been an increase in short term sickness absence days. So it makes it even more relevant to see what is actually, because I know in another meeting we've discussed, or we're looking at issues of sickness. I probably as well, I know we set targets, but that's one thing I wouldn't set a target for. I'd prefer to see the best you achieve and just a series of numbers. And the other question was the average number of employees. Looking from 2014-15 to 17-18, unless my maths are up the wall, we've only lost 124 employees, which I found a little difficult to understand.
Okay, certainly what I wanted to set out there is give you a bit of understanding about the breakdown of the level of sickness in terms of short and long-term days, and take the point in terms of then looking at the average number of working days for the both. As you rightly identify, the description says that short-term days have increased or long-term have declined, and sort of the comments there give you an understanding about some of the work that the team have put in. I know as a committee you've looked for a more detailed breakdown in terms of understanding. Obviously we've got various service areas, there's various reasons behind the sickness, and that's part, I think, of your work programme already. So I think that will help you give that broader understanding. In terms of the average number of employees, just to give you a bit of background in terms of how that's calculated, that's based on the average between at a point in time. So it's then taken in March 1 year, March next, and then average. So the figure for 2017-18 would have been number of employees on the 31st of March in 2017 and number of employees on the 31st of March 2018, and then taking the average. So at that snapshot in time, you can see that actually the last 2 years there's been no change. But there obviously has been a decline over the last few years. That's how it's calculated. As you say, in terms of then what's that showing in terms of understanding then the number of employees as a council. I know they've done work around improving their record management of employees and things like that. So I think it's maybe something you may want to raise as part of that item.
Thank you very much for your response there. And I think, Councillor Smith, we've got the whole issue of staff sickness coming back to this committee with HGVs, and those are the only two items in September. So I think that if we will really be able to have a real close scrutiny of this particular topic. But obviously it's a very important point that you raised there, and it's one for further debate when they come back to us in September.
Yeah, I'm content with that, Chairman. I know we're still considering the issue. It's just interesting to see it there. But as I say, the average number of employees and the explanation, considering sort of my picture and reading elsewhere, it's certainly not 124. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Were there any other questions for Richard? Councillor Harris?
Mine was also on sickness absence, but that can wait. But I'd like explanation in September as to how we get to the 10.9 if it's based on the figures underneath, 27,330 and 2,513. If it is based on that, I can't see how that comes out at 10.9. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Harris, did you want to make a comment there, Richard?
Yeah, so it's showing average days. So for each employee, it's the total number of days is shown as 27,330 for 2017-18. Average number of employees 2,513. So you divide the two together and get 10.9. I can do the maths.
Thank you. Councillor, are you happy with that, Councillor Harris?
Yeah, if it is 10.9, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Roden.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed that the amount of waste going to landfill is decreasing, which is really good. But I also noticed that fly tipping incidents have increased quite dramatically over the last couple of years. And this is a concern, particularly if we are going to implement a reduction in hours and closures at public amenity sites. I just wondered if you'd like to comment on that, please. Thank you.
So is that one for... Are you happy to take that, Richard, or do you want Roger to take it?
So I think broadly you can see there that the incidents range from about 300 to 420, and I think it'd be interesting to look compared to other areas about how Monmouthshire ranks in terms of number of incidents recorded. the commentary there identifies there's been a new reporting system introduced to make it easier for members of the public to actually report incidents of fly tipping. That's only been introduced in the last quarter of last year, and that benefits that brings to us in terms of being able to then manage those fly tipping incidents as well and pick them up in a timely fashion. So it's a bit of background in terms of the performance shown in front of you for last year.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. You haven't taken any, we haven't implemented any changes as yet to opening hours around civic amenities sites. Whether that comes forward at some point in the future is for you. It will be for you to debate at that time. I would suggest that perhaps the increase in numbers relates to an improvement in our reporting system and making it more straightforward. The Mon app, my Monmouthshire app, is a much more straightforward way and quicker way for individuals to report the incidences of fly tipping, and it has had teething problems, but overall there are improvements being brought with that. Along with that is our speed of response is also improving as well, or ultimately will improve. I think it's dipped in this year, but it will come back up because of the teething problems with the system. I think you will need to have a broader debate about the civic amenities sites, the times which they are open, accessibility, but that isn't, we broached it at the briefing which we held for all members here a few weeks ago now. There's no decisions, nor was any recommendations placed before you. So, yes, that's something you may wish to take into account at that time.
Did you want to come back, Councillor Roden?
And just thank you very much for the explanation for the increase in the incidents. The idea of better reporting systems is obviously of benefit to the council, and it'll be very interesting to see how the next set of figures shows up. Thank you.
Councillor Guppy.
Yeah, just going on Councillor Roden's question, really. Significant reduction in waste going to landfill, but I think some of it is going to Cardiff to the incinerator. That's not quite the right term. I just wondered if we could have a report brought to this council in view of what they're doing with their waste and or how efficient and where the things are going. Because I think a lot was invested in the project with numerous counties, and I just wonder if we could have a feedback report at some time, because obviously it's had significant efficiencies for this council, but you know, so where is it and how efficient is that service being with the use of that service?
Thank you, Councillor Guppy. And I don't know whether you were able to come to the visit that we went on earlier on in the year to the Cardiff facility, because it was very informative, and we saw at first hand how what happens to that those items that go there, and we were able to ask questions afterwards. But would you like to further comment, Roger?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. And we broached it to some degree when we did the briefing the other week. But if it's of benefit to members just to see perhaps a single sheet of A4 which says what goes where as of today and how much, then that should be reasonably straightforward for us to prepare and provide to you, perhaps not as an agenda item, Madam Chairman, but simply for information. A single sheet which says this goes there, that goes there, that goes the other place. A couple of the burning items just at the moment, like your AD, what's going to happen to your food in March, because don't forget you've got a major change coming in March of next year when we change our collection systems. We have a new fleet. you have a massive change. But in the interim, a single sheet, Madam Chairman, if that's of benefit to members, then I'll arrange for that to go around.
Thank you very much, Roger, and I think that's a very good point that you've raised, and we look forward to receiving that information. Any other questions at all from members on this item? So we are asked to scrutinise it, and obviously we've done that this morning. Is everybody happy that this item has been covered in enough depth? Councillor Webb. Yeah. So I think we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is agenda item number 7, and I would like to thank Richard for coming along today and presenting that item to us so clearly and putting some more meat on the bones for us. Thank you. So we move on to agenda item 7, which is the budget monitoring outturn report, which I know some members did attend the Adult Select the other day and have already seen this particular agenda item. And I would like to welcome Dave Loader and Mark Howcroft, who are going to present this item to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. For the purposes of camera, my name is Mark Howcroft. I'm the Assistant Head of Finance, and this is Dave Loader, the Finance Manager in charge of this particular portfolio. We intend to double team the report. I will give you the overview of it, and Dave will help me with any specific queries you might have around your portfolio, if that's okay. So this reflects the outturn position for last year, and to a certain extent there's a half-life to this information in terms of you receiving it in July, obviously after the year end, and the ability to influence the outturn isn't there. But can I remind you that the purpose of this report being sent to Select is for you to actually assess the monitoring activities of Cabinet, to the extent that paragraph 2 requires you to consider and assess whether effective budget monitoring is taking place, monitoring the extent to which budgets are spent in accordance with agreed budget and policy framework, to challenge the reasonableness of any projected overspends and underspends, and to monitor the achievement of predicted efficiency savings that obviously Council would have set collectively in terms of the savings mandates in February 17. So the report's twofold, really. Recognising that you all have a ward consideration, it gives you an overview of the council more generally, because there's an expectation that you probably know about everything that's going on within the council for the benefit of your communities. But it also then explains specific aspects of interest to particular selects and how that is chunked up over the scrutiny function. So at the end of last year, we achieved a £650,000 surplus, the details of which are included in paragraph 2.1 in terms of the various heads of spending and the variables. The recommendations describe a capital slippage of £11.8 million. The majority of that is on the Future Schools programme, which was always anticipated to be a multi-year consideration. There is £2 million in relation to the Strong Communities portfolio that I'll explain in more detail as we go through the report. That capital slippage of £11.8 million still resulted in a net underspend of £395,000, the detail of which is included in paragraph 3.5.9. And the majority of that is that having finished a couple of schemes that were actually underspends registered against them, which are available for members' future consideration against borrowing targets. So specific to the committee, the paragraphs start off at paragraph 3.32. It describes the outturn for Chief Exec's office, with legal incurring a £23,000 surplus, largely in relation to legal fees, and operations collectively incurring a £615,000 deficit. And it describes which of those service areas actually was significant in that outturn. It also describes resources department, which incurred a £400,000 underspend, largely split between finance, IT and the corporate landlord. In finance, we like to be the panacea that we expect everyone else to deliver against, so it's nice to be able to report an underspend from our division that's so significant. Corporate incurred a £547,000 underspend, largely savings in insurance provision. At the end of the year there, we have to do an analysis of claims that we've received in, payments that we've made out, and likely claims that we know of that we're going to pay in future. And then we assess that against our reserve provision for payment of insurance claims. And actually, in conjunction with an actuary who's a professional risk manager, we have agreed that we could actually reduce our insurance reserve by 172,000. The effect of which being that actually we reduced our contribution into 2017-18 rather than actually take the money out of reserves and feed it back into the council's revenue account. In the last 2 years, the council has set aside a pot of money within corporate for redundancies, respecting the fact that actually, given the annual settlements we all receive, there are probably less and less of us annually, and that helps to avoid that volatility in terms of paying for those adjustments in services. And there was an introduction last year of a piece of software that allowed us to actually look at duplicate payments within the council system where officers had paid invoices twice. And obviously the effect of that was to actually claw back money from creditors that we'd previously paid. That's not unusual for private sector firms to utilise similar software, but it's the first time that we've actually done it zealously last year. Commonly, appropriations and financing provides a significant amount of underspend to compensate for net cost of services overspend, and last year was no difference. Treasury underspent by 850,000 and financing by 480,000. On the financing, that's effectively the net additional receipts from council tax payments after council tax rebates have been allowed. And Treasury, whilst I would like to say it's as a result of sound and active Treasury management, it's also the effect of the slippage to the capital programme, because obviously if we're not borrowing £11.8 billion that we anticipated, we're going to get a saving in terms of interest payable that we didn't have to pay. So to a certain extent, and one of the questions that was asked at Adult yesterday, so do I actively encourage people to incur slippage so that we can manage our revenue budget? No, actually, my preference is that people use the resources that members have volunteered to them through the year as early as possible, but there's a recognition that with any capital scheme, it's generally has a life that might extend past a 12-month period, so those projects can be multi-year considerations, as you would imagine a secondary school provision would be. So there's director's comments at the end of there, and obviously you can see what Peter Davis says in relation to Resources Directorate and Roger in relation to operations. The savings progress specific to strong communities is described in paragraph 3.45, the detail of which is on page 58 to 66 of your bundle, if you want to discuss that at any detail. I'm pleased to say that earlier in the year we were anticipating a shortfall from the savings in resources due to the market's service savings not being delivered, but actually that was introduced now and is working at a more economic level. CEO's contact centre reorganisation had been delayed, and there's a saving on the whole place that was predicted to be £100,000, and that actually through the year they only achieved 35,000, leaving a shortfall of 65. There is a saving in there against procurement of 100,000. I think this is something that the council probably needs to think at in more detail, because whilst everyone anticipates that we have quite a large supplies and services budget, it's very difficult to actually demonstrate that there is any great saving from procurement. It's largely one that's imposed on service directorates from the centre, and as a result of which it doesn't necessarily have the ownership within the teams. And similarly, service departments actually often will look at the way they do things in the procurement and look to take those savings themselves direct. So there's always a potential for double counting between generic central savings that are passported to services and those that services choose to make themselves. But that was actually accommodated in this year's budget round in terms of taking that inherent pressure back out again. So grass cutting and maintenance savings. There was going to be some changes to the schedules which haven't actually occurred, which means that those savings aren't manifest to the full extent. And there's an inherent deficit within trade waste at the moment in terms of it does derive a surplus, so there's a useful value to the council in doing it. But obviously, it's quite a competitive market in relation to private contractors out there. It's not a statutory function of local authorities, so anyone can engage in that activity. And what you tend to find periodically is that outside companies will come in and give particularly low prices as a loss leader approach to these things, with a view to actually signing people up for a contract that will then increase through the term. You wouldn't be surprised to know that our anticipated winter maintenance saving didn't materialise given the problems that we experienced towards the end of March. Just to put that in context for you, in terms of highways and operational issues, the costs of that, we were asked to put a bid together to Welsh Government for an extraordinary grant award. All authorities in Wales were. Our costs within Monmouthshire were of the order of 400,000. Our apportionment back from Welsh Government was less than £50,000, so you can see that there's a net £350,000 there that affects the operations bottom line there, when in fact we were hoping for a clement winter and a saving out of our winter maintenance. Looking at the capital slippage that I described earlier, a lot of that is a result of multi-year grants that Welsh Government agreed to late in the year that they expect to be slipped forward. So things like car park and highway maintenance work, there's about £900,000 worth of funding slipping between the financial years. There was some work around bridging and retaining walls that required specific approval from Welsh Government, which wasn't able to be achieved by the end of the financial year, and has subsequently had that engagement done this year, so we've slipped that forward. There were some slippages in relation to IT schemes in terms of their introductions and delays. County Farms portfolio involved a £75,000 underspend that resulted from works that were proposed at particular farms that it was difficult to get access because of the health problems with particular tenants. It wasn't appropriate to do that work last year, but I didn't want them to have a problem in terms of an unanticipated liability of £75,000 and not having the money to do that work this year, so we slipped that forward as well. There is showing an underspend on DFGs. It's probably a bit artificial, that, because actually they more than overcommit the resources that they're allocated to them annually. That's simply a case that the arrangement that we have in Monmouthshire is that the contractor is secured by the householder, and that contractor has up to 12 months to actually submit their bill. So at the end of the year, there is a degree of variation, but what we tend to do is, as DFGs are overspent, we'll always slip forward that money so that when the invoice comes in, it doesn't become a cost of future years' programmes. And there was a saving, a slippage in relation to Section 106, totalling across the schemes £500,000. Paragraph 3.71, it's always keen to remind members of the reserve position and reserve usage. So para 3.71 shows the reserve usage that was undertaken in 17-18 and the slippage that the officers require for 18-19 out of 17-18 approvals. As a result of that activity, paragraph 3.72 shows the anticipated reserve levels, and actually providing my normal doom and gloom message to members, I would describe to you that we're using up earmarked reserves at a faster level than we are replenishing them. That's not necessarily a problem because those earmarked reserves are set up for a particular purpose, and if we don't intend to use them for that purpose, you don't effectively need to keep an earmarked reserves. That is slightly different from general reserves, which is effectively the annual surplus and deficits on the council fund account. And you may recall that as a financial planning assumption, members have agreed to set that level of reserve between 4 and 6% of our net expenditure each year. And I'm pleased to say that the £7 million is just below the 5% level, which you would expect given the financial environment that we're working within. some of you will hold governorships within schools, so might have an interest in schools, although I appreciate it's not specific to this portfolio. But just to say that through the years, schools were forecasting a significant use of balances which didn't materialise at the end of the year. Part of that was influenced by a late Welsh Government grant of 300,000, which would have immediately affected their reserves and had a beneficial position. But even despite that, instead of using a budgeted use of reserves of 800,000, collectively they only used 93,000. So the year end for schools reserves was still a £175,000 credit. And at that point, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed for that excellent report, and I personally really appreciated the way it was written, because if you don't have a background in accountancy, it really did lay it out very, very clearly what the challenges are, and each individual section was gone into in enough detail for us to have a good understanding of it, but written in layman's terms, which I really appreciated. Members, do we have any questions for our team? I know this has been debated at other committees. Councillor Smith?
Yeah, it's more to Roger than to Mark. Yes. Oh, it's all right. It's a funny. No. Listen, I'm no finance. You know that. I'm trying to learn, Chairman. But suddenly it struck me, going through your report, only a small issue. The trade waste, we've not done as well as we thought we would like to do. And it suddenly struck me, what is the attraction to outside businesses of collecting that waste? I mean, I know we refer to it now as a resource, it's a material or whatever, and we do the best we can with our recycling. But what are external firms doing? You know, why the enthusiasm? They obviously have probably have different employment arrangements, but it just struck me, not all the figures, this little issue this time.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's straightforward market economics. They're coming in very aggressively at the moment, quoting against our prices and undercutting. We win some, we lose some. We charge for trade waste. We're obliged to charge for trade waste, and we compete with the national companies, and in particular a couple of local companies which are very aggressive in their pricing at the moment. Let's put it that way. And we lose contracts accordingly, and we pick contracts.
Pennies dropped very clearly, Chairman. Yes, the pennies dropped, but it suddenly, as you spoke of that, it raised a question in my mind. No, it's as clear as a pikestaff. They're getting the same price for the product, but it's their actual collection rates that are different. Thank you. I'm sorry to be such a...
No, thank you for raising that, because really connected that just briefly. I would like to ask who really monitors the activities of these companies, because I was amazed. I recently had a kitchen, new kitchen, and the old kitchen was all sort of, I paid for a company to come along and recycle all the waste at great expense rather than having a skip. But I was amazed at how many companies knocked on my door to try and take the waste away. So who's actually monitoring this, these companies, and so that they're not, some of this waste isn't being, for example, then fly tipped?
I wouldn't want to stray too far into an area of legislation which I'm not 100% sure of, but I'll have a go. I believe it's your responsibility to ensure that waste is removed by a licensed company. So it is reasonably straightforward, and if it's then fly tipped and information can be found in that fly tipping, then ultimately any enforcement may well come back to yourself. Your argument is that you gave it to another company if you believe to be acting in good faith to have that, to take that waste away and dispose of it responsibly. But my understanding...
Can I add to that? What it is that if you have anything taken away from your household that somebody collects, they do need to be licensed, as Roger says, but they need to give you a receipt that they've taken it. So then there's you know, you've got the trail, the audit trail. If they take it and don't give you a receipt, one, it's questionable if they are licensed, because they have a good duty of care if they're licensed and to give you that receipt. But if they don't have a license and you don't have a receipt, you are liable for that fly tipping if it's seen from you, come from you, if they've evidenced it from you.
Well, thank you for clarifying that, Howard.
Just a clarification in case I've created the wrong impression. The £80,000 saving pressure, the reality is that we operate our trade waste at a surplus. In other words, our income is greater than our expenditure, so it is worthwhile us doing it. Just our income levels weren't sufficient as we'd anticipated.
Chairman, can I suggest that the public is made clearly aware of their responsibility, and it might sort of strengthen their thinking that Monmouth was a good, sound business to go through.
Thank you very much, Councillor Smith, and thank you, Dave, for clarifying the position. And I think it's an important point, because I certainly, you have to think about waste now, and when you have a project done at home, you want to be as responsible as you can in making sure that waste is recycled. But I think that you've raised a good point there, and maybe it's something we need to send out, perhaps with council tax bills or something of that nature, just to ensure that people are aware of what their responsibilities are.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. A little bit of a press campaign and social media campaign, just to raise awareness really about people's responsibilities, and to ensure that you only work with a responsible and licensed company.
Thank you. Councillor Eason.
Thank you once again, Chair. It's a question to do with non-domestic rates, which there's a change of regime in collecting rates for the last 12 months or so. We don't keep those receipts, do we? They go to Welsh Government, am I correct? But the question is, having made the changes nationally about non-domestic rate levies, has there been an increase in collection within Monmouthshire or reduction? And what has been the effect of those legislative changes?
You are right that councils provide an agency collection service for Welsh Government. They collect the NNDR across Wales. It then gets receipted in the Welsh Government and reapportioned to council. So what you collect isn't necessarily what you ultimately receive as a council. In terms of the changing environment, I'm aware that there was quite a lot of changes last year about rate revaluations, that I think the Valuation Office is still dealing with the rump of those cases. In relation to our collection rates and how they relate to other councils, I'm afraid I don't have that information to hand. It's actually done by my colleague Ruth Donovan, but what I can do is find those out and actually pass them back by way of feedback through the chair, if that's okay.
The question, I raised the question really because there's been a lot of furore from some businesses. They've suddenly had their rates lumped up a lot, but some have stayed relatively similar, some have had reductions. But I'd like to have a view from Ruth Donovan on the effect it's had across Monmouthshire's businesses, because that is coming to us as members as a problem.
Thank you, Councillor Eason. So, Dave, is that something you'll come back to us with at a later date?
Yes, I'll come back to you.
Thank you. Councillor Roden.
Thank you, Chair. I note a loss of £1,200 per day due to a school bus contractor failing, presumably because they ran into financial difficulties. Do we actually check the financial bona fides of companies when we're actually giving them substantial contracts, particularly like this type of thing? Thank you.
Probably not as explicitly as we do, say, tendering for building work, etc. What the general check will be is around their operator's licence and their ability to actually do the contracts. And I know from actually being involved in the tendering fairly recently that actually, whilst they will put tenders in for multiple routes, the reality is that they can only do so many, bearing in mind how many licences they have. But actually, as to their financial activities and whether they will create a volatility for us. I don't think actively we check that information out at tender stage, no.
For certain types of contracts where we could be faced with quite a large increase in price, if there is a failure, is it worthwhile asking companies to provide some accounts, possibly, so that we could anticipate if there's an issue that's going to arise? Thank you.
It was certainly something that I've picked up in the last couple of days in terms of what sort of performance bond, if any, that we hold on relation to their performance, and as a result of which that's normally when you would look at their accounts. I think it's a very sensible suggestion. What I would say is that I want to reassure you that it doesn't create a volatility to pupils, because our own PTU section will actually be a transporter of last resort sort of thing, and we'll take those routes on. The problem to us is that it creates a volatility in the financial reportings, that actually where we've accepted a quote at a cheaper level, that we can generally do it. When that comes back to us, then arranging with the market for another provider when you're on the back foot is probably not the negotiating position I'd ideally like to be in. So I take your point, and if I can follow it through with colleagues and perhaps let you know of an update as to how we get on with it.
Thank you, Councillor Roden. Are there any other questions on agenda item 7? The first page of the item sets out quite clearly the recommendations proposed to Cabinet, and one of the things that really jumped out at me was 2.5. Members note that the low level of earmarked reserves will notably reduce the flexibility the Council has in meeting the challenges of scarce resources going forward. And obviously it is a very, very fine balancing act that the Council is managing moving forward. So I need to ask the committee, are you broadly in agreement with those recommendations on page 1 as they are laid out there? Can I have a show of hands, please? Thank you very much indeed. And can I thank Dave and his team for presenting such an excellent report to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming along.
Sorry.
Thank you, members. If we can now move to agenda item 8, which is our Strong Communities Forward Work Programme. We've discussed at length the meeting that we have on the 30th of July, and I'll just now hand over to Hazel to just take us through the future.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I don't wish to labour the point about the meeting on the 30th of July. Obviously, it's not in your schedule because it was only set up in the last day or so, but very important meeting to look at a single issue, so it will be a single item agenda. Usually special meetings, we tend not to put the public open forum on the agenda, but obviously this is a specific issue where we are aware that lots of people would like to have an input. So we will put the public open forum on there, and what we've said is that we'll increase that to 30 minutes from the usual 15. Bearing in mind members of the public have engagement sessions, as mentioned, that they could go to offer views as well. The actual select committee meeting is a members meeting to discuss the actual review of the policy and to consider the feedback from those sessions. Also hear from people who might want to speak to you firsthand, but it is your opportunity to debate the policy and to make recommendations. So the Chair and I felt that half an hour was appropriate amount of time really to enable public speaking. We've asked people to, if they're sort of speaking on behalf of groups, then to nominate sort of a spokesperson for that group, just so that we can manage the process as well as possible and be fair to everybody. So it will be short representations. Everybody should now be aware of that because it's been put on Facebook and social media, and there'll be a press release tonight. So that's the next meeting. But after that, you've got your meeting on...
Before we move on, can we just take queries on that? We've got
Yeah.
Councillor Harris, Councillor Eason and Councillor Guppy.
I note your restriction to half an hour, and Hazel will remember the Budden Crescent inquiry that went on for quite some time and actively involved everybody in the room, public as well as members, and it went very well. Staff as well, in fact, because they might have an input. I wonder, it sounds like it's all arranged now and gone out on social media or whatever, but I just wonder about flexibility there. What do you think?
I think you always need to build in flexibility. I mean, we've experienced this morning where we've had lots of members of the public who would have liked to have had a longer discussion with you. And the whole reason really why we've set up that special meeting is because it wouldn't have done it justice today, given that you had a substantive agenda already, and there's the issues that people wanted to discuss. They were very different issues, and they weren't listed as proper agenda items with reports for you in advance. So, you know, we have to sort of adhere to governance, but I think when you organise a special meeting for a specific topic where you know there's going to be lots of members of the public that would like to have a view, you need to be flexible. And in the past, we've enabled members of the public to speak. We've had then presentations from officers, and then we've enabled them to chip back in with some questions if they've got questions. So really, it's your discretion as a committee as how you want to handle it. I would suggest you have a pre-meeting, as usual, half an hour pre-meeting, and at that meeting you can sort of you can get maybe a little bit of a sense of how many people are planning to attend, and then you can exercise your discretion there. But I would think people are going to want to attend this meeting to offer a view, but they also want to see how you debate it. So as long as you can balance the public contributions, but then be quite clear that as elected members, you are the people that are going to be debating this and making the recommendations. As long as the roles are clear, I think then you can be flexible.
Just coming back on that, Chair, has the members of the public been made aware that it might be sensible beforehand to send us material that they might want to have discussed?
Yeah, I mean,
that should be, I think, part of our response back to them.
And I think that we really hope that these various groups will engage with these drop-in sessions, which will, you know, enable them to have an in-depth discussion with officers that are present then, and so that we don't get duplication on the day, and that we get really information sent round to all members about the outcome of the drop-in sessions and what topics are raised, so that we've got a good idea how we're going to approach things on the day and what are the most important pertinent issues that need to be dealt with, so that we spend time discussing things that really matter to people. Does that answer your... Yeah.
One thing we could do, I know the press release is going out today, so we could add in a line to that to say that if people have material that they'd like us to sort of consider in advance, that we can ask them to send it to us. I mean, what would be your sort of deadline, I suppose, for receiving that? Would you say
10 days before?
I think 10 days might be, it might be a little bit too short notice. I mean, they've got sort of just under 3 weeks notice of the meeting, so maybe a week before, if they want to send you anything to consider in advance. Is that okay?
Is everybody happy with that? Yeah. Did you want to add anything, Councillor Eason?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, I support the thoughts of Roger. In the latter part of the last council, we had a single issue pertaining to Abergavenny, the fishing rights and canoeing, etc. They had a very flexible chairman that morning, I must say, and it went very well. because we had the flexibility within the discussion, and it did work well.
Councillor Guppy, then Councillor Roden.
Yeah, just sort of picked up what the gentleman this morning said, that he wanted to meet officers before the meeting on the 30th. And I don't know if that's been organised, because I think they were able, I know they've got the drop-in, but they may be able to air their views and come up with some kind of negotiation of what the factors are. I don't think the drop-in centre will meet their needs, so I'm just wondered if we can get back to officers to see if they've organised a meeting with them. And I didn't want to say anything there sort of to preempt what's already been arranged, but I just maybe if we could check with officers to see if they have organised a meeting, because that may help the meeting.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very important point, Councillor Guppy. Hazel, would you like to come?
Yes, I think another suggestion has been made by another member of the public along those lines, that they'd like to meet with officers separately. So I'm aware that our officer followed them out through the door before they left and saw them off. So I think they did discuss that, but I will check that, and I'll suggest that we've suggested that they do that to try and make sure that when we get to the 30th, those discussions have all been had.
Councillor Harris.
Sorry to keep coming back in. I've just thought, I'm looking around, I'm the only Abergavenny member here. There's a lot more of us in Abergavenny and obviously throughout the county. How much flexibility are you going to give us suddenly being confronted with all 43 of us coming along to the the special meeting and wanting to stick their two penneth in?
I think that's an important point, and also the visit. I know that, for example, Councillor Woodhouse probably would like to join us, and I don't think we should include all members that want to come on our minibus trip around. And I think it would be helpful if councillors engage with us and let us know what areas of concern they will be addressing, so that, as I say, we don't have duplication and we make it the most effective meeting we can. So I think if we can write a briefing note out to members asking them for the particular areas that they wish to raise at the meeting. Yeah, that's a good point. Councillor Roden, then Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Well, if Roger's idea of all 43 members turning up is correct, this might not be necessary. But is it worthwhile asking the cabinet member responsible for this area to join us on the day?
Yeah.
I think that goes without saying, and certainly I've had a number of email exchanges, and yes, I mean, obviously we have confirmed with the portfolio holder, have we, that he's available on the 30th? Yes. Yeah. Yes, thank you.
Ask any idea, any indication when the bus might be running round? Have you any idea of a date?
We'll get back to you with that as soon as we can, Councillor Smith. Yes, yeah, because it's very important, because this is a busy time of year. I know a lot of people have got children, grandchildren finishing school, and there's lots of demands on everybody. But it is such an important issue to our communities that we need to address it as a matter of urgency. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Smith. So if we can move on to the meeting and the forward work programme from September onwards.
Just to sort of highlight then that the next meeting will be the September the 13th meeting, when we will bring a discussion paper to you on HGVs. Having spoken to the gentleman that presented to you this morning, I think he would like to present the slides and the video that he'd sent to me in advance. We'd carefully orchestrated it, to be honest, to make sure that it worked today and we could show it to you. I just hadn't realised that it was quite lengthy, and that it's one of those cases when members of the public turn up to public open forum. If you've got one and you've got 15 minutes, then you know, you can offer a bit more time, but unfortunately fortunately we had quite a few today and different subject matters, but it did mean that we had to sort of split the time a bit differently. So with that in mind, I mean, if you would be prepared to perhaps extend the public open forum for that meeting a little bit longer, that might help in case you do get other members of the public that want to sort of speak on that, and it would certainly enable the gentleman this morning to make his case to you. And at that meeting, I think we would propose to bring that discussion paper and also table the response on people services and the sickness and nothing else. I think if we just take those two items, the people services will be a bit shorter because they've been to you recently. It's more of a follow-up item, outstanding questions, but I think that you need to allow plenty of time for this discussion on HGVs.
Thank you. And I think that it's very relevant that the gentleman, you know, he came along with his presentation, and in an ideal world, if nobody else had been, we would have liked to have heard it today, but that wasn't the case, as you rightly say. And it is actually more relevant that he comes along in September when we are debating HGVs in its entirety. And I think if we extend the public forum to half an hour with members' consent, are you happy with that, members? Councillor Harris?
Thank you. I was next, I think. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
You need to be sat up here with me and directing me.
My thing is, it is working now. I mean, this isn't unique to this gentleman's ward. I mean, what ward is he in? Who is his local county councillor, please? I would like to know. It's not unique to his ward, the problem of big lorries. In my ward, walls are being knocked down. I mean, the huge issue, and it's in your ward as well, which is quite similar in certain respects. And we try and deal with these with, internally. I know that he needs to express his problems and his concerns, but as I deal with it, I deal with Roger, and we try and get the best outcome, which isn't very successful because it's really quite impossible. The huge lorries that are attending chicken farms, huge tractors, knocking walls down, it's a huge problem throughout the county.
Very well said. So, Councillor Harris and then Councillor Eason.
Who is his ward member, actually?
Councillor Clark.
Is Councillor Clark aware of these problems?
I think we ought to obviously extend an invitation to Councillor Clark to attend the meeting. Councillor Eason.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. On this particular issue, it is an Usk issue, and I'm not saying we shouldn't have issues across the county, because the same issue is raised in Severn Area Committee. Yeah. Next Wednesday, there is a meeting of the Central Mon Area Committee at 10 o'clock. I don't know where it is, but perhaps he could be informed that he could make his presentation there and then bring that back to us later.
That's a really good idea.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, and I think some of the issues that Mr Sutherland was brought to the committee likewise are things that should be taken to the area committee, which is the point I was trying to make to him. Yeah. And I think the same with the gentleman here, that are pertinent to his particular area. So I think perhaps we need to send in an email offering him that opportunity if the chairman of that committee is in agreement. Councillor Roden, I'm so sorry I missed you.
Don't worry about it,
my
Chair. I was going to say that Councillor Webb covered most of the points I wish to make. However, just to reiterate one of them, and that is the size of farm-related vehicles these days is astoundingly large. And I think that just calling it HGVs is possibly the wrong name for this discussion. That's about it. Thank you.
That's a point well made. So perhaps we could add in, what other words would you like in there? Large agricultural vehicles and HGVs. Does that satisfy everybody? Councillor Webb? Exactly, that is the forum that he should be using. Okay, fine. So we've discussed the September meeting. Is there anything that members feel very strongly should be added to our forward work programme? I have one item, which is modern slavery and trafficking, which I've been trying to get on there, I think, since I started, which I think is an issue which is affecting all communities. So with your agreement, I would like to see an item brought to the committee on that particular issue. How does everybody feel about that? Would you be in agreement? Yeah. Yes, it's social. It runs into the social justice portfolio. Yeah, and it's a topic that is really being highlighted a lot in the media, and the plight of some of these. I mean, I've had things like in my own ward, cannabis factories, and residents have said, who are all these people that are running around that we haven't seen before, and it really did bring it home to me that actually it is happening everywhere, that people are being trafficked illegally into the country and then find themselves wrapped up in illegal activities to pay back their passage. That's just one of the items, but it's a much broader issue.
You'll probably want to have a couple of meetings on that, really. Maybe start off with a sort of discussion and context. We can invite a lady in who's got quite a bit of experience in that. She deals with that sort of issue here, but also in another neighbouring council. It's like a shared post. She's got a shared post. So, I mean, that could open up the sort of discussion, but I would think this is one that's probably going to roll on in the work programme, and you'll need to have several sort of slots on that, I think.
Councillor Easton?
That's an excellent topic to bring up, but would that be a crime and disorder matter?
Yeah, I mean, technically, as a committee, you've got crime and disorder responsibilities underneath you, and I know Councillor Eason feels quite strongly that we often don't put those and list them on the front page of the agenda as crime and disorder matters, but it is a crime and disorder matter, and I think for the purposes of at least satisfying Councillor Eason's desire to see a crime and disorder matter on an agenda under Part A, that we should do that. And I think similarly when we bring the road safety strategy, that could also feature as another crime and disorder matter.
Thank you, Councillor Easton. Councillor Webb.
It is, and it's a statutory responsibility that has to sit with a select committee, and it was agreed that it would sit with yours. But, I mean, whilst you've got that statutory responsibility, invariably you have been sort of scrutinising some issues that are pertinent to crime and disorder for some time, but we've never listed them specifically under the Part A. But I think when we do these two, we should put them under Part A.
We've got a new inspector in Monmouthshire, Damien something or other, I can't think of his name. Perhaps we can invite him to that meeting. Yes.
That would be very helpful, and that's a very good suggestion. Okay, fine. So are there any other items that members would like to raise for future scrutiny? So if we move on to agenda item 9, which is the Cabinet and Council Forward Work Programme, which obviously has been circulated to everybody. So we need to keep a very close eye on that. Anything else to add?
No, but if anybody sees anything in that planner that they would like to know more about, then they can get in touch with me or the chair, and we can ask to have sight of that report. So that's the purpose of you keeping a watching brief on it, okay?
Thank you. So I just would allow agenda item 10 to confirm the date of the next meeting being Monday the 30th of July. We'll meet at 9:30 for a 10 o'clock start for the special select committee to deal with the one issue of street scene, A-boards and street furniture. And then after the summer recess, we'll meet on September the 13th at 9:30 for 10. Yes, Kate,
One more thing, with the special meeting on the 30th of July, with your pre-meeting, given that your select committee meeting will be open to all members, would you like to have all members at the pre-meeting, or would you like just your committee at the pre-meeting and then all members to come in? I'm thinking in terms of practicalities, it might make your pre-meeting a little bit difficult to steer, but then on the other hand, the other side of it is you can make it very clear how you want to run the meeting and manage things, and then not have to explain it all again in the actual meeting to some members who might think, well, no, I want to do it like this. So
Bring them all in.
Yeah.
And can I be
Everybody
a pest?
happy with that? Pardon?
Can I be a pest? At a recent meeting, I raised the matter of the roadside advertising, which is a problem as well. Would that roll into street scene?
Well, it's anything to do with the highway, so that covers pedestrians, side of the highway, so yes, it would. Yeah. No. Well, thank you very much indeed, everybody, for your patience and, for the fact that you've been very flexible and, been prepared to accept what we've had to do over the last few days, because it has been extremely challenging behind the scenes getting everything sorted out. And I would like to thank Hazel and Paula for all the work that they've had to put into this and will have to put into it, just to make sure that everything is organised in time. But this is such an important issue to our community. So thank you all members for your contributions today, and we look forward to seeing you on the 30th. The meeting's now closed.